I grew up here, went to school here for 12 years, was the last class to graduate from Cramerton when they consolidated to go to South Point. And then the odd thing, or happy thing about that, is that I also taught here at Cramerton and until I retired. So I went from 1 to 12 and then 31 years after that back.
We started school at Cramerton in 1967. Mr. Black was my geometry teacher. So he was so much fun, and I remember sort of struggling to learn how to do the equations and things, and finally I got it. So I remember Mr. Black.
We were competitive, although a small school. We were very competitive in sports, and we had great activities such as in high school we had a organization called the Key Club, and it was affiliated with the Kiwanis Club in Cramerton. And the Kiwanis Club really took us in and taught us very much about being individuals and respecting people and having discipline. And we were raising a generation that we said, yes sir, no ma'am, thank you, let me get that, let me open the door. And it was just part of our life.
All of the teachers I had, I really loved back in grammar school, and got in high school, and most all of those I got along with, and I liked them. But I did have one that was my nemesis, and I didn't get along with her. I'm not going to give her name right now. But Miss McGee, I was in the other ladies' class study hall, and I finally end up in Miss McGee's second year French class for my study hall because I couldn't get along with the other lady. French, I can sing the song Rudolph le Reindeer Rouge-Nez, avez-le trachin, vous avez-vous back, nous dere reliving.
Yeah, the school was, other than jumping out the window when Mr. Beatty fell asleep in science class, I mean, yeah, I did that. No, I mean, it was just a great school. I mean, I had some great teachers growing up. It was just, you walked to school in those days, you walked home from school, you know. The kids from Academy came over and started when we got into junior high. That's how Kathy and I met. When she came from Academy Elementary, I come from Cramerton Elementary, and then they had Cramerton Junior High, so that's kind of how we came together. I mean, just, yeah, I mean, it was just a great school. I mean, I could tell you all kinds of stories of stuff that went on, but it was really a very, very good school. You were taught in that school. You know what I mean? We had fun, but at the same time, there was serious business about learning.
I can remember my mother telling about Miss Sandiford, who was her first grade teacher at Cramerton School. And Miss Sandiford lived in Lowell on Grove Street. She would, I believe Mama said that she caught the bus and she stayed at the teacherage all week. And then on Friday or Saturday morning, she would go back home to Lowell.
And Mr. Haney was very nice. He was the principal when we started at Cramerton, and he was just very compassionate and caring. So that was also something that I'll never forget.
We were just like most typical boys, being William Guy and Leo Fox. We would sometimes go at lunchtime, because we didn't have a closed lunch period. We would walk downtown to the store there and get a cheese sandwich and an orangeade, and then we would supposedly go back to school to be back in 45 minutes, but we would go up the river, and most of the time it was an hour and 45 minutes, and we had to make that time up after school. And I had wonderful teachers all the way through. And to this very day, Miss Underwood, who taught us 8th grade at that time, she did not believe in paddling, but she would keep us after school. She would make us memorize. And to this very day, I still remember the poem Cremation of Sam McGee, the shooting of Dan McGrew, and the Gettysburg Address. And that came about, the Gettysburg Address, because Cramerton had bought a new fire truck, or had a fire truck. They brought the fire truck up, and they were timing how long it took to evaluate the school. And anyway, I was at the front of the line, and William Guy was back of me. And when we went down the steps to the door that we were supposed to go out of, I just touched the door, and I said, "This door's closed." And William turned and said, "This door's locked." And the class turned around, went to their alternate exit, and that was the one that was locked. And we created all kinds of problems, and that's when I had to learn the Gettysburg Address. I still know it to this very day. Yes, I know the Gettysburg Address. My favorite, though, was the cremation of Sam McGee and the shooting of Dan McGrew.
School was great. We always had great teachers in school. We both graduated from high school here, went on to college. She went to the mountains, to Appalachian, and I went to Wake Forest.
Going to school here was like going to a private school, but it was public. It was all the towns, but everything was special. Everything was provided that the surrounding communities did not have, and plus we had the friendship of the teachers. They were super. I agree with Dan. It just super.
But 1963, 7th grade, we went on a field trip in November of 1963 as a 7th grade class. And we went down to Raleigh, North Carolina on the 22nd of November of 1963. And a lot of people who know history know that is the very day that John F. Kennedy was assassinated. We were coming out of the State Archives building back to the bus, and we saw some of our teachers on the bus, and they were crying and in tears, and we found out that President Kennedy was assassinated. And so we went over to the chapel and had prayer from that moment, and prayed for the family and prayed for the nation, as a matter of fact.
In the Baltimore Village School, I can't say enough about the Baltimore Village School. That was a one-room African-American school that my mother and my aunt and my uncle attended back in the 30s and the early 40s. And it served as a educational institute for African-American students during segregation. It was 8 grades taught in that one school, 8 grades, and one teacher, and a potbelly stove. And to get an education, and from what I understand, talking to my aunt and my mother and some of the ladies that went to school there, the 8th grader could come back and help the teacher teach the 1st and 2nd grader. I guess you could say that was the beginning of teacher's aid. An 8th grade student coming back and helping the teacher teach the 1st and 2nd grade. Also, I hope kids appreciate the education they get today compared to the education compared 100 years ago. Also, you can take your sibling to school and babysit only if they behave. That's what the teacher said. Now, you can bring a 3 or 4-year-old to school with you only if the child would behave. Could you imagine trying to learn and trying to babysit at the same time? So I hope the kids today would appreciate the education that they're getting compared to the education that was given was available 100 years ago. And after the school was no longer a school, it became a recreation center for African American kids in the village.
The principal, Mr. Haney, he was so cool. I thought he was really cool, you know. Sometimes he seemed a little hard around the edges, but I tell you what he did one time. I had skipped school, and I got caught. I was at Waterburg over in Belmont, and I got caught. So the next day, my dad had he had started a garden out beside the house, and we were standing there in the garden, and Mr. Haney pulled up, and I thought I was gonna pass out. I thought, he's come to tell my daddy. And I thought, I've had it. He's gonna kill me. He walked up in the yard and he introduced himself, you know, and he said, I think you're gonna have a pretty good garden. And he looked at me and he said, don't you, Libby? And I said, yes, sir. And I mean, I was sweating it so bad. And he said, well, I just thought I'd stop and say hey to you. Everything going all right? You know, and I just shook my head.
I wanted a job at Cramerton, and there was a position coming open, and Mr. Huss was the principal. And so I went for the interview, and he said, Sandy, I really, you know, you'd be a great teacher, I know, but I just, you know all these students, you know all these kids, you grew up with, you know. And so he didn't hire me, but you know, and I really hated that. But then years later, Mr. Hanna, he called me and he said, Sandy, would you like to teach here at Cramerton? And I said, I would love to. So I came back to Cramerton, and that was in 1979, and I taught there until I retired. I started, of course, at the old school and then moved to the new school. So that's my career. One place, you know, but mostly one place. But I loved it. You know, it was home, and it was just perfect.
It was such a pleasure. We loved going to school. And a big plus we had is we had quality teachers. A lot of our teachers graduated from, at that time, a place called Appalachian State Teachers College in Boone, North Carolina. And we had a teacherage. And a lot of them, those teachers, once they graduated from Appalachian State Teachers College, they came and lived actually in the teacherage. So we had quality teachers that were dedicated, and they taught us the principles of God, family, and values. And that's one area that I am so blessed that we had in Cramerton. We had great teachers. We did not have many in our school. My graduating class, we had 32 members, and that was in 1966. And probably in our entire school at that time, we had probably 400 children. But we just really knew each other, loved each other, and we came from the same fabric. Most of our parents worked in the textile plants.
Yeah, it was wonderful. All the teachers were outstanding. I had Miss Kathy in the first grade, and I remember Miss Mears in the sixth grade was a special teacher. She read a thing called Miss Minerva to all the students. We all heard the stories about Miss Minerva from Miss Mears in the sixth grade. And Joe Bumgarner taught the eighth grade. He was a special teacher, and it was exceptional going to first through 12th grade in one building. Unlike today, you go to middle school, you go to high school, and different schools. But back when I grew up, you went to one school, 1 through 12, the whole time.
And you know, it gave me, well, really, it gave me my my job, you know, when I was a teacher. And that was one of the best things. And then, of course, what my students gave back to me, it was so funny. I would say, is your mother so-and-so? Or, no, not your grandmother so-and-so. So, it's like we all have a connection. You know, it's just a connection.
I went up here to the Mayworth School Apartments, to Cramerton School, and of course my sister went all 12 years. She was the last graduating class of the Cramerton before everybody went to South Point, so I went there for 9 years and had a lot of good memories there. I have a friend that lives up there, and I go visit her, and every time I go through that school, I'll think, well, here was my first grade room. Here was Mrs. Bridges. She was my first grade teacher. I'll never forget her. Most of my teachers, Mrs. Horn, these are teachers that I'll never forget. And it was just a fun place to go to school, and it was just, it seemed so close. You know, everyone seemed so close.
Miss Patrick was on her later years of teaching, but she was our first grade teacher. She had the red birds, the blue birds, and the yellow birds, which was a way of denoting those that could read a little bit, those that could read some, and then those that need a lot of help. That's the yellow birds. But she had a train, cars, and each day you come in, you'd put your name in your car to know that kind of way of taking inventory, I guess you'd say, as an account of inventory of who was there that particular day. I have great memories of, the great Miss Haney. She was the wife of principal, Mr. Haney, but 6th grade, 7th grade. She always told, and this was during, the Cold War period, she says, you need to remember all of the Bible that you can, for if it ever came a day when they take the things away from you, they can't take your memory. She loved the Great Teton Mountains of the West and showed a lot of pictures of her summer travels to us. That inspired us to want to go and see some of the country. Now, candidly, one of the most profound teachers that I had was Miss Buchanan. She was a typing instructor. I think we had her first, that might have been her first job out of college, but she was very good looking to us young men. And we didn't mind typing all good men must come to the aid of their country, but that one class has probably served me better throughout my career.
Mr. and Mrs. Haney, Mr. Haney was the principal. Miss Haney taught, I think it was 6th grade. One of my friends might correct me, but I think it was 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, somewhere in there. And she was a great teacher. I remember she was artistic, but she was strict, and most of the teachers were strict. I remember one time I was writing my name on the inside cover of my book, whatever it was, and probably not paying attention to her, and writing. And next thing I know, there's this slap on my back, where of course that wouldn't happen today. But she, just like as she was walking by, she saw I was writing, which we weren't supposed to write in the book, and the fact that I was probably not listening to what I was, so her palm of her hand just, and which of course knocked the book off my desk, and everybody's looking around, and she said something about, you're not to write in the book, and so I learned my lesson.
Well, it was unusual in that it was 1 through 12. The front part of the building was for the elementary school, and the back part of the building was more, and up, on both floors was for the high school. And it was never a problem. The schoolrooms were very large. We had a closet on each end that you had your own little cubby, and you'd be able to hang your coat up. I remember all my teachers. Well, I think all the teachers were very dedicated to their jobs, and I think at that time they could not be married and teach. When I was very young, So therefore, they lived in the teacherage that was beside Cramer Memorial Church, and they lived in the teacherage and had a lady that did all the cleaning and cooking for them.
We were born in '53, which would made us the class of 1959, first grade class. That was the largest first grade class that started Cramerton Elementary School. We had friends from all sections of town, and actually this location here is geographically then about the center of town. So we had friends from all over, and of course this was the center of activity for most of our youth.
Well, you know, as being young, I don't know, in maybe second, third grade, fourth grade, stuff like that, we had Miss Patrick and Miss Widenhouse as teachers. And I remember even younger than that, we would go in there. I remember when we used to throw the rugs down. They would make us take a nap, you know, as young kids, and just first, second, third grade, stuff like that. Throw the rug down, take a nap, and you'd get up and you just, you know, go about the rest of the day. And so, you know, I had some good teachers. We got up into the later years, 5th and 6th grade. I think it was Mr. McCarnes that I had for a lot of the PE teacher stuff. They would take us down to, you know, the gym and work us over pretty hard. He was one of the good physical education teachers at that time. And
we called him Snuffy. I don't even know what his real name was, but this old fella, he would push a cart around town during the summer months. I remember the cart was white. It was just a big refrigerator with wheels on it. It had like bicycle tires on it for wheels, and it was shaped like a boat. Had a pointed front, you know, like the bow of a boat. And that man must have had the strongest legs in town, because he pushed that thing all over the place, up and down the hills. And he wore one of these a pith helmet, you know, like a safari-looking hat. He smoked a pipe, and he wore khaki clothes, and he was always suntanned, real deeply tanned, and his face was like leather. But he pushed that cart around and had a cowbell on it, ding, 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 so you hear him coming. And that was always the highlight of the day, if you hear that cowbell coming up your street. We got there and buy fudgesicles and banana fudgesicles and like push-ups and just ice cream. It was fun. And sometimes he would show up even before school had ended for the summer. You'd hear him out there on 8th Avenue, and he would, I'd see him, he'd park his cart right directly across the street from the school and sit there and have a thing of water or eat his lunch or something. But it was like he was just taunting us.
The school was, you know, the teachers we had were incredible people. My first grade teacher was Miss Patrick. Second grade teacher was Miss Nesbitt. Just really, really good teachers all the way through. I've thought about this the other day too, after I talked to you a week ago. You know, we had beside the school there was a teacherage. It was a big house, and teachers. Some of the teachers lived in it, and I think like Miss Patrick, I think she lived down toward the southeastern part of the county, but I think she would stay in the teacherage through the week.
There was a time that more people were graduating. Cramerton School had a high graduation rate, and I know that's talked about in education, where how many people, but most people graduated from Cramerton School that went. Not all, but a lot of them left high school early to go to work in the mill.
Started Mayworth School in 1959. I went through those front doors at Mayworth, and my teacher was Miss Patrick in the first grade, and she taught my sisters, and she taught my mother as well. So that's a big connection to have that all the way through.
Going to school in Cramerton was great. We all knew each other, and I went from elementary school all the way up until the 9th grade, and then I left here and went to South Point High School. They took the high school out of Cramerton, I think around 1969, and merged with Belmont to become South Point High School. But I do remember going to the high school basketball games with Cramerton. Cramerton was still Cramerton High School. And I was telling somebody the other day, one of the things that I enjoyed the most was watching the girls basketball team here, because they had a really good team. And there was a girl named Lucille Holt, which was Carl Holt's daughter, who was like the star player on the team. And everybody wanted to come watch her play because she could just shoot the lights out of it. And the gym would be so loud, people clapping their hands, stomping their feet. It was just a lot of fun. So I do remember that growing up, going to the high school basketball games here. And of course the football games down on the field. Cramerton was just, it's kind of like it's where it's getting back to now. There's something going on all the time.
We had the 1st grade through the 12th grade. Our classes were very small, so the teachers had a lot of time to deal with us. And he had recruited most all the teachers to come here. He went around and searched, and he built them a home, we called it Bennett Hall, down beside the Methodist Church, and for them to stay, because most of them were single. They were single teachers.
I don't know if anybody remembers the Bennett Hall, but there's probably a picture somewhere in this museum, the Bennett Hall, that was attached to the church. Well, it wasn't attached to the church, but it was the old teacherage. And that was a beautiful building. I wish it was still there.
And I thought about this other teacher we had named Elizabeth Mears. Miss Mears was, as far as I know, she was never married. She was a very eccentric lady. And her parents, her family, I think, were from Monroe and were of some, standing in the city of Monroe. But Miss Mears, she came and stayed in the teacherage all week. And I had her for a teacher, and she was notorious for rainy days. On days when it would rain, she would get a record player, and she would set it out in the hall. 2nd floor of the school, she'd set the record player out in the hall. You got to remember, this a whole, you got 12 grades here, so you got adult, grown-up kids here. She would set that record player out in the hall when it was raining. We couldn't go out for recess. And she would put on marching music. The monkey wrapped his tail around the flagpole or what have you. And she was a little short lady. And she would march us up and down the hall. And she would be in front, like she had one of those batons, where she would. And if it weren't bad enough that we had to do it, it was that everybody in the school got to see it.
Yes, we did go over to Baltimore a lot. They have what's known as the little schoolhouse, I believe, and they would have dances in that little schoolhouse. I think the Historical Society or someone has renovated it. I would go and visit Sandra Fuel, Evelyn Johnson. I would visit Mr. Howard Rose and his children.
I used to, when I was in the 5th and 6th grade, I was in Miss Haney's class. She had 2 grades in one classroom. And at lunchtime, some of us kids, we could go home for lunch. And I remember Jimmy Stroop was one of them. We would walk home. Usually about 11:15, they let us out, and we'd walk home for lunch, and go down to gym pad, of course. And I'd get home, and Mom would usually have me like a fish sticks or a hamburger patty or something like that, for my lunch. And she would be listening to the radio. It'd be WCGC in Belmont, and they had a bingo game back then. I think you got the bingo cards at Winn-Dixie or something, and you play bingo over the radio. If you got bingo, of course, you call in. I don't think she ever won. But that's a good memory, just walking home for lunch, then go back to school. I walked to school since probably 2nd or 3rd grade. And even in high school, I didn't have a car, so I'd walk down here and catch the bus here right across the street from the school, and get off the bus there and walk home.
Well, the lunch, I remember before they built the Raider Center and the cafeteria was over there, the lunchroom was down on the bottom level of that. It was kind of like in the basement. And everybody would go down there, and we'd all walk in a line and sit at tables, our whole class and everything. But what I thought was weird is it was like we went down to the basement to go to lunch. It was the bottom level of the whole building, and it was kind of creepy, but we still had a good time, but we'd just say we'd say we're going down to the dungeon for lunch.
I started school in 46. We walked to school. At that time, we didn't have a car. But later in life, when we did have a car, we still walked to school because it was not that great of a distance. Of course, when we got to be teenagers, we wanted to drive ourselves to class. The school, one thing, a comment I'd make about the school was that the teachers were above par, from what I understand, for the area, because our salaries were supplemented by Mr. Cramer. Another thing I think at the time that made Cramerton unique is it had its own school district. It was independent of Gaston County at the time, up until 1969, I believe it was. So we had teachers that some lived here in what we call the Teacherage downtown and adjacent to the school here, which is now the Raider Center. And they were supplemented by Burlington Industries to some degree.
We only had 37, 38, 39, somewhere around there in our graduating class in 1969. And so it's one of the smaller classes they had. But we're still family. We're still a great unit. We have our reunions, and if we need something, we'll call and pray with one another, and that's a good thing. We do that.
The sawing players, and I don't even know how that all came about, but it was going on before. I'm sure before I got to school here in the first grade, but second, third grade, whatever. It was like a group of actors, and they would come every year and put on a play. And I don't know if they did it, they may have done it a couple of times a day, just so it could get everybody in the school to see the play. And it seemed like they did, stuff like Tom Sawyer, or they were adults, but they were, they were doing like Tom Sawyer, I don't know. They came every year for several years. It was a pretty cool thing, and everybody got geared up. You had the sawing players are coming Thursday. We don't have to take a class. We don't have to do any kind of homework. The sawing players will be here Thursday.
Well, most of the people that I talked to about that would talk to me about my mother's teaching, they really loved her. She was a good teacher. She worked hard. She didn't mind using a paddle, and I know that she was known to paddle people, just like Miss Judy Horn that was there, and Miss Broadway, and back during that time, you walked out of line, you went out in the hallway, and you got a paddling. But we all, everybody in my family had her. My husband had her in 3rd and 5th grade, both grades. My sister-in-law had her in 4th grade. My brother had her in 4th grade, and I had her in 4th grade because back then there was only one class per grade level. So you pretty much, unless they moved her out of that grade level, you were going to have your mother as a teacher. I just know what I was when I was in that room, and I think we talked about that earlier, that she was not my favorite teacher because I stayed in trouble. Now, I love her, and I loved her as a mom, but as a teacher, she gave me a hard time.
I always thought my favorite teacher was Gladys Haney. She was the principal's wife, and she actually had 2 classes in one room. She had the 5th grade and the 6th grade together. So I was in her classroom for 2 years straight. But she let us have art days where she'd just bring out the crayons and colored pencils and chalk and all kind of stuff and just let us do artwork for a day. And that kind of helped me because I became sort of an artist years later. So
I've always loved school and learning. I remember all my teachers, and they were very nurturing. Back then, most teachers were single adult women, and they lived in a space on North Main that the company provided for them. And they invited me there. But in the beginning, Miss Patrick was my 1st grade teacher. Miss Nesbitt was my 2nd grade teacher. I think Miss Lowe was maybe 2nd or 3rd. And then Miss Sanford was 5th. And then it kind of got into high school, and there was Miss Barnett. No, Miss Barnett was my very favorite. She was my 4th grade teacher. And a funny thing, 2 funny things about that is I wrote so fancy that she couldn't read it. And I also bit my nails, and she'd come along. She and my mother had worked together, and she'd pat me on the head to remind me not to do that. And then she kept trying to get me to get my writing more undecorated, so to speak, so that she could read it. So, and in high school there was Miss Klein, Miss McGee. So I just like the schools. I like learning, and I still do today.